Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Professional Advisor Digital Working Lunch, brought to you courtesy of our partner, SimplyBiz. I'm Hope Coumbe, Editor of Professional Advisor, and I will be your host for the next hour. Before we get going with today's session, let me quickly run you through the usual housekeeping. So your microphones and cameras are currently switched off, and we'd be most grateful if you could please keep them that way, just to ensure that there's no background noise. I should also inform you that this session is being recorded, and we will send you a link of the recording by tomorrow, and do feel free to share this with your colleagues. Now, as usual, today's working lunch will qualify for 1 hour of CPD, and we will be sending that to you at the end of the session or tomorrow, so do keep an eye out of that, and you will also have your proof of attendance in there as well. Now, getting into the session, over the past year or so, Professional Advisor has written quite a bit about the challenges of moving from being an authorised representative to becoming a directly authorised advisor. Whether you are currently directly authorised or considering making the change, this is the working lunch for you. I'm joined today by two senior members of the SimplyBiz compliance team, Head of Policy, Sandy McGregor, and Head of Compliance, Paul Burns. Sandy and Paul are going to be discussing considerations for firms before making the decision to become directly authorised, along with some key considerations in the current direct authorised world, including what the regulator expects, remain compliant, good governance and controls, risk and monitoring, consumer duty and delivering good outcomes, best business practice and MI, and advisor recruitment and due diligence. Now, do feel free to put any and all of your questions to Sandy and Paul using the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to have some time for Q&A at the end, so please do make sure to ask any of your burning questions. That will be the time. So just before I hand over to Sandy and Paul, let me quickly run you through our learning objectives for today. So by watching this presentation, delegates will be able to gain an understanding of regulatory expectations in a directly authorised world, learn how consumer duty and delivering good client outcomes are beneficial to best practices, not just regulatory requirements, and how to understand the key risks today and how to monitor them. So that is all from me for now. I'll pass over to Paul Burns. Good afternoon, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Skip through this slide. What we were looking to do today, as part of this, the invitation, kind invitation from Professional Advisor, is myself and Sandy having a leisurely over lunch walk through some of the key themes that we see as a compliance support provider and fintech business within the regulated environment. Really, we were looking to sort of have a bit of a discussion, bit of a presentation on the options that firms have. So, different ways firms can operate, advisory firms within the industry. Look at the role of the FCA, how the FCA supports businesses and builds the framework and, the world in which we live, really. Look at the expectations as well. So what firms really need to do to beat expectations, and how those requirements are actually good business practice as well, and how those requirements can actually meet the improve businesses as well as meet regulatory expectations. And then just dial into a couple of current hot topics before we look at what support is available for firms, and typically we do some Q&As towards the end, if that's okay at this time. So in terms of what we're looking at today, sorry, the slides is quite slow turning over. In terms of an intermediary financial advice firm, there's two real options for operating in the industry: either under direct authorization, which is directly authorized with the firm and the FCA, So a firm has actually been given permissions, granted permissions directly by the regulator to carry on regulated activities. Firms are therefore responsible for their own actions, their own outcomes, or as an appointed representative, which effectively is a firm contracting with an already regulated firm and acting under their authorisation and under their permissions and under that firm's basically rules, etc. The principal firm there, the main directly authorised firm, takes responsibility for the actions of the appointed rep. Now, at SimplyBiz, we're really passionate about direct authorisation. There is a place in the industry for appointed reps, particularly people who are early into the industry, learning the trade, gathering their knowledge, etc. So I think there's a real place for that sort of setup, but we are passionate about direct authorisation and the benefits that that gives firms. I just asked a question to Sandy. Over the last couple of years, the landscape has changed a little bit for networks and appointed representative firms, hasn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Paul. So one of the highlights in my particular social calendar is an Association of Professional Compliance Consultants Spring Conference. And last year there was a keynote speaker there from the FCA talking about changes that they've made to the appointed representatives regime, in particular new rules strengthening responsibilities and expectations, you know, for firms that operate under that model, including an annual audit by the principal firm and new reporting requirements. So, as you say, very much in recent times we've seen a levelling of the playing field in terms of regulatory expectations, whether you're directly authorised or operating under the AR model.
And in terms of one of the reasons why we're at SimplyBiz, we do also sing the praises of the directly authorised options and the directly authorised route. It's what it presents to firms, really. It's about freedom and control. You know, as a directly authorised firm, you manage your own business, you select the processes, you follow the solutions that you yourself derive and come up with. So in terms of everything you do, it really is down to the firm. It's your business, it's your way of operating. So things like the scope of service, whether you're independent, whether you're restricted, any advice process that you build or you can be supported in building, the investment process, choices of any software that you use, which could be cash flow modelling, it could be risk profiling tools, it could be mortgage research engines, any choice of software, any affiliation to a mortgage club or protection panels, if that's the arena that you're in, and particularly the client proposition and the charges that you apply. You know, they're down to you. So that as a business, you should be in charge of those. You should be shaping them to fit your clients. So all advice firms have their own set of clients, with quite specific needs. So I think it's really important that is the road that people travel down or aspire to be travelling down. And with that freedom and control, you've got stability and security. So, you know, you've got an understanding of your business. You know the financial position of your business. Within recent years, there have been some issues with networks. A number of networks have closed their offerings or introduced more robust controls and stricter controls around what they allow firms to do. So, as being a directly authorised firm, you've got the autonomy. You can plan your future, you know, with confidence based on your decisions. So, as well as the financial position, you understand your own liabilities, you understand your own risks, and you can mitigate those. Real independent decision making is important. You know, your own senior management team, your own board, to be able to decide how your firm has a strategy and how you execute that strategy. Growth and future opportunities, direction as well. You're not at the mercy of decision making, you know, above the level of the board of a directly authorised firm that can impact upon, you know, the strategy or the direction that a firm goes in. And one thing just to you know, be aware of is under direct authorisation, you know, that freedom that you get from being directly authorised, it does bring with it a certain responsibility or set of responsibilities. And that requires firms to operate in line with certain FCA expectations. But the good thing is when you look at these expectations, and we've just highlighted a few key areas there, things like governance and oversight, systems and controls, financial resources, advice monitoring, general competence and capability. It doesn't matter what business you're in, whether it's financial services, it could be retail, it could be industry, manufacturing. You'd see a similar setup here on how to run a good business. A good business should have governance and oversight. It should be aware of its financial resources. It should have good systems and controls around monitoring, around risk, around control and decision making. So there's nothing that you wouldn't see in other industry and around a board table in other industries there. So we look on that being as good business practice. And the beauty of working with a client support provider is that they can provide you with the framework to be able to do that, and consultancy support to make sure that you're able to carry out these tasks within your business, and also have sufficient time to really focus on your clients and delivering good outcomes for your clients. So the route to authorization itself, it can be a little bit daunting or feel a bit daunting for firms and for people who've never done that before. And the basic principle from the FCA is when they assess a firm to see whether they are able to go directly authorised, they want to make sure that the firm is ready, willing and organised at the point of application. And it can have certain complexities in there that people just won't have done before, particularly if they're coming from an AR firm, they're coming from a network into the directly authorised space. And what we'd say is there are people out there who can support. So we'd strongly recommend engaging with a support provider, someone like SimplyBiz, who have got years of experience of working with firms who are becoming directly authorised. That's not as onerous as people think, because you're part of a team who've done have significant experience over the years in doing this. So that's just a little bit of food for thought for firms. If anyone's thinking about going directly authorised, if anyone's already directly authorised now and wants to, engage a little bit more, there are people out there. There's plenty of options for people to be able to do that. I think we are at poll number 1. So excuse me if this goes wrong, because I've never done this before. So we have a poll, so it'd be good to get a little bit of feedback, a little bit of information, from the audience, so that we get an understanding of the audience. So poll number 1, which I have now published. So that's to sort of gather an understanding of, as an intermediary in the UK at the moment, are you already directly authorised, or are you in a network and thinking of going DA? So, what is the makeup of the audience today? Okay, these are all anonymous as well, so this doesn't go anywhere on screen, so no one will be able to see this. Okay, I think we've got. So based on the results there, we're looking at 51% of the audience is already DA, and 48% is in a network and potentially thinking of going DA. So pretty much a 50-50 split there, which is interesting. I'd like to just hand over now to my colleague Sandy, who's going to just talk a little bit about the actual role of the FCA and position, the reason why there are certain regulations in place.
Thank you very much, Paul. So, the role of the FCA. Well, as I'm sure everyone on the call will know, the FCA is the regulatory body that is responsible for overseeing, financial services, the industry as a whole in the UK, and they do have certain operational objectives, and those are on the slide. So really, it's to secure a degree of protection for consumers. It's to promote the integrity, trust in the UK financial system, and also to promote effective competition. So really to make things better for our industry and to help things thrive. It does operate independently from the UK government, but is accountable from the Treasury. So many of the policies that you hear about in the press that the regulator implement will be driven through its accountability to HM Treasury. So firms do pay fees to the regulator for the privilege of being authorised and regulated. If you're falling to that AR camp and you're thinking about going directly authorised, then there would be a fee that you would pay for the process of applying for permissions. What that fee is dependent on the permissions and activities that you wish to undertake. And then there are also fees that apply once you are a directly authorised firm. Those on the call today will know about those annual fees. However, what I would say as a positive on that point is that there is downward pressure on those fees, particularly the ongoing fees, which I think at times have been recognised that in combination with PI costs are too high at the moment. And it's a reflection on the job that the regulator themselves are doing, that those are too high. In fact, there is downward pressure through a number of initiatives that the regulator is undertaking, particularly in the space of the Financial Services Compensation Scheme and the Fund of Last Resort. So I fully expect that certainly ongoing fees for firms will reduce, going forward. I can genuinely see that happening in the coming years. So the regulator themselves, as I've said, they're there really to help industry. If you are moving into the directly authorised space, you will have compliance tasks. There will be annual compliance tasks. There will be ongoing reporting that you will have to do. You'll also need to maintain and oversee a high quality advice process designed with your clients in mind. That said, I'm sure many of those also exist within the appointed representative regime, if that's where you sit as a business. The great thing is that there is support on hand. So when I started off at SimplyBiz, I was on the compliance help desk, and I was dealing with newly authorised clients and members that had been authorised for decades, and dealing with those day-to-day queries and providing that support. So that's the great thing about consultancy, in a way, as Paul mentioned, that you're dealing with so many different types of firms. You're able to share experience and assume that vast knowledge of a particular sector. So underpinning regulation are these principles for business. These are kind of the fundamentals of the FCA rulebook, really. And there were 11 until last summer, when a 12th was added, and that was delivering good outcomes under consumer duty. I'm not going to spend long on it, but run through. Basically, there's integrity, so you must run the business in an honest manner. You must be honest in your dealings with clients. You must have that level of skill, so that's achieved through qualifications and T&C regime. You must run the business effectively. Financial prudence, so things like having some capital set aside within the business should the firm encounter a complaint or something like that, redress situation. Have your customers' interests at heart. Communicating with your customers in a way that's fair, clear, not misleading, and also deliver suitable advice, so advice that customers can rely on, and have that open dialogue, with the regulator, through reporting or notification. So have that constructive relation with the FCA. And we'll come on to consumer duty in a bit more detail shortly. So there's this thing also called the threshold conditions, and these are fundamental pillars upon which your firm's authorisation sits. So crucial that you meet these threshold conditions at all times, whether that is you're applying for authorisation or you're an existing authorised firm. We're going to cover them off very shortly, the 5 different threshold conditions. But really, if there's one thing to take away from today, it's that if you see reference, or you're dealing with the FCA and they start talking about threshold conditions, that is really important to you and your business, and make sure you take notice of that, and also speak to your compliance consultant if you're unsure how to proceed. So the 5 key threshold conditions, those are, well, location of offices, that your mind and management should be in the UK. Effective supervision. So Paul talked earlier about being ready, willing and organised. You know, you need to be able to, if you were applying to BDA, for example, make sure you pick up the phone to the regulator, respond to their emails within set deadlines, and also for existing firms that you're completing your reporting on time. So really just having that effective relationship with the FCA. Adequate resources, so that's about having some capital sat within the business if you're a directly authorised firm, but also having the right succession plan in place. So if a key individual was to leave or be absent temporarily, that someone else can step in and fill that role. Something we've been focusing on a lot at SimplyBiz in terms of having that training in place for individuals who might step up into a senior management function role, you know, as required. Suitability, so that's just your ongoing fitness and propriety as either a senior manager or an advisor within a firm. Things like your honesty and integrity, but also your competence and capability, which a lot of which is derived through your training and competence regime. So things like file reviews, CPD, etc. And business model, finally. So it's about having the right business model in place. So really that's getting at if you were going through a period of growth, so acquiring client banks or other businesses, that your business model keeps pace with that. From our perspective, that would be things like your governance and risk monitoring, your compliance oversight, that keeps pace with any growth that you're seeing in terms of the business activities that you're operating. So the FCA has a handbook that it will often refer to when it's communicating to you. I've got to say that it is a difficult to use handbook, difficult to navigate at times, but I think actually the FCA themselves also recognise that fact, and I think we're going through a period of a kind of change in nature of regulation. So we're moving a bit back to basics, focusing on these principles that I've just talked about there, also the threshold conditions and consumer duty, which I know we're going to focus on a bit later. So actually I think we're going through a period where we're going to see a bit of a simplification of regulation. I know that we've had these Edinburgh reforms talked about where they're looking at perhaps stripping away some of the more complicated rule sets that perhaps were imposed upon us at times through European directives that didn't quite fit the FCA system. So I think we're going to go through a kind of back to basics, right? Okay, rather than what's that technical rule set, what is the looking through to the outcome for the client? Was the outcome right for the client? So certainly a very interesting time to be in this particular space. I'll hand you back to you now, Paul, I think, for the next section.
Cheers, Sandy. Thanks very much. Yeah, what we were looking at doing here now is just to spend a few moments looking at some of the key things that we've found from some of the consultancy work that we undertake. So 3 key subjects really. Looking at governance and control, have a little bit of a look at risk management and monitoring as well. But just before we do that, I've just set the scene a little bit by mentioning a couple of pieces of regulation. One is the senior managers and certification regime, which came in 2019. Again, a really important piece of regulation and really positive piece of regulation. This is all about individual responsibility and accountability within businesses. And it's the whole industry. It's not just the advisory businesses. It's right through banks, building societies, lenders. You know, SMCR is all about responsibility, all about making sure that people who are in the positions of influence and decision-making positions within financial services businesses are fit to be there and are capable and competent to do so. So that's a really important piece of regulation there. And the second one is the consumer duty, which Sandy's going to cover in a little bit more detail later. Again, a real focus of consumer duty is on customer outcomes. So it's all about consumer outcomes and making sure that businesses are monitoring and reviewing what they do to ensure that the right outcomes are there for customers who work with them. And again, from a SimplyBiz perspective, working with directly authorised firms, it really lets people look at their own business. You know, you've got a consumer duty lens looking into your own business here, your own business procedures, your own business controls, to make sure that your business is right for your consumer, for your clients, in a proportionate manner as well, based on the size of your business, so that you're not having to apply rules and a blanket approach that apply to everybody, dictated by a separate management body, really. So we'll have a look at that in a little bit more detail later on. The first key thing we were going to look at is governance and control. So one of the activities that our SimplyBiz consultancy team do is they work with firms to set up real clear governance and control frameworks, and also review them on a regular annual basis, highlight any deficiencies, any gaps, and work with firms to make sure that these systems and controls are actually suitable for their business to keep them safe in a regulated environment. So what are the benefits of governance control, and what do you need to have in place? Nothing in here will be rocket science. It's all relevantly straightforward and simple things when you look at it. But having a governance framework, having something documented, having a clear structure chart that shows reporting lines, and having a job description or role profiles that clearly show what people do, what their responsibilities are, and how they're measured as part of their role. There should be a statement of responsibility for any senior managers of the business that highlights where their regulatory responsibility sits, and also an assessment that the people in those positions have got the right knowledge and experience to carry out those roles. And overall, you're looking at ownership and accountability. And again, that's something that's good practice for any business, really. In terms of decision making and the direction of the business, ensuring that the board or senior management of a business is set up properly and is having regular meetings, making sure those meetings are minuted and agenda driven, referencing business objectives and a business plan that should be in place, and having strong record keeping there. So again, when we see the regulator working with firms, and when we go in and speak to firms, the firms that have this sort of framework are firms that generally are better performing firms. They've got clear accountability, the clear division of role and responsibility within a business. Typical meeting agendas. You know, if you're running a board or senior management meeting, things like business performance and business opportunities should always be there. You're looking at where your opportunities are, you're looking at your business growth, you're looking at how you can actually invest back into your business. But things like existing and emerging risks as well, you know, threats to business should be considered. Financials, capital adequacy requirements that Sandy mentioned earlier, having a regular check to make sure that the right amount of income is in place and that's not an emerging risk. Management information is becoming more and more important. The regulator, the FCA, is becoming more of a data-led regulator, and as an industry, firms are becoming more data-led, specifically with consumer duty. So types of management information and data to be reviewed by boards, general advisor KPIs, business KPIs, complaints data, client feedback, really important. You know, are we doing a good job? Do our customers think we're doing a good job? File review outcomes. You know, you're looking at the competencies, you're looking at suitabilities and the outcomes for clients as well. But really important to be considering those. And also annual reviews. So as part of a proposition for investment firms, committing to an annual review, and firms are paying, clients are paying for annual reviews. Are they being carried out? What's the plan? And where are we up to on that plan? Then you have things like general training and competence, regulatory updates. So updates and bulletins from, you know, a firm like SimplyBiz, who sort of signpost where regulations going and what actions need to be carried out, and then general consumer duty as well. You know, we see all that as being good practice, real good ways of businesses being able to keep a finger on the pulse and be run in a real structured manner to get those outcomes that they're trying to achieve. In terms of risk management, where we mentioned before, current and emerging risks, being aware of the potential for risks is really important. And through part of the authorisation process, it's really important for firms to look at their business and actually have a risk plan that's based on what they do. And it's about managing those risks as well, considering the likelihood of a risk actually occurring and the potential impact if it happens. Again, this is good business sense. So in terms of what we'd see as good practice here, to appoint a senior person who would actually be responsible for driving that risk programme. Carrying out a risk assessment exercise. So looking at your business, identifying where risks could be, quantifying those risks, okay. Looking at the impact and probability, and almost grading those risks in terms of the magnitudes of that risk it presents. Identifying gaps in process, looking at systems and controls, what are we doing to manage those risks, and what do we need to do to improve those risk management methods. Looking at implementing and updating any controls off the back of that as well. And then from a board perspective, what MI comes out of the risk monitoring? How does a firm know whether the risks are increasing or decreasing? So it's management and monitoring, staff training, and you know, that feed into the board reporting, which in this modern era is really important for data-driven, data-led businesses. So typical things that we see when we work with firms, putting together risk registers and risk mitigation plans. Sorry, just slides are slow here. I think we've got a slide issue. People of professional advisor. There we go. So what we're looking at there is just some key risks that as a business we've identified with firms and put plans in place to mitigate. So things like loss of key personnel, you know, identifying those people, having a deputy who's trained up and knows what that person should be doing. Having key person insurance as well, in case you have to recruit to fill a role there. Not being up to date with regulatory change, so things happening, consumer duty happening, consumer duty assessments being required by the end of July this year. How do firms know that? So having robust compliance oversight, having compliance monitoring plans, using compliance updates that companies like ourselves provide for firms, using the FCA website as well. There's lots of things people can do to actually mitigate that risk. Big risk, providing unsuitable advice and unsuitable outcomes to customers. The biggest risk a firm faces really is as a result of the advice that advisors are actually providing to clients. So making sure that there's things like risk-based monitoring plans, risk-based client file reviews, robust supervision of advisors, having a strong training and competence regime in place. So as the leaders and as the senior people within an authorised firm, directly authorised, you're looking at monitoring this to make sure that the people who are out there engaging day to day with your customers are competent and capable of carrying out that role. So you're keeping an eye on the advice that's being written there and using the output of the advice to evidence consumer duty as well. Failing to meet the threshold condition with regards to capital adequacy will be another one, and not delivering those expected client reviews, which we've mentioned previously. So they're key risks, and having a solid, robust compliance monitoring plan in place actually manages that risk, and also having regular senior management board meetings to touch base and make sure they're happening. Obviously, some firms might have a board. It might be on a sole trader basis. You would have a very, very similar structure. It wouldn't mean you have the need for board meetings, but you'd certainly have a compliance monitoring plan, and you'd be monitoring yourself to make sure that you're keeping up to date with everything that you need to keep up with. And quite often we see smaller firms engaging with compliance consultancies more, sort of as a little bit of a sounding board to ensure that that is actually happening. In terms of monitoring, we see that there's two key types of monitoring really outside of your compliance monitoring plan. You've got advice monitoring and advisor monitoring. So advice monitoring, we always recommend a risk-based monitoring plan, a risk-based, effectively file review plan really, that looks at the different risks and overlays that to make sure that that business is being monitored, but in a proportionate manner. So looking at things like the risk that a client presents, the risk that an advisor presents, or a product. And there's a sort of a red, amber, green schematic there on the slide, just to show that some products are quite low risk, and that moves through to higher risk products like DB transfers, etc. You'd expect to see different levels of review frequency on these. And that applies to advisors as well. New advisors to a business would present a higher risk than advisors who were deemed competent and been there for quite a while. Independent and impartial reviews are really important too. There's an old adage there of if you don't know what you don't know. So, you know, the regulator signposts these, and we always say, if you have someone in who does an impartial review of any business that you're writing, they're able to actually give you a more rounded and objective review. Advisor competency, system adequacy. You know, what is the outcome? What is the contributing factor to a potentially unsuitable or unclear case? Is it down to advisor competency and development, or is it a more systemic issue that's part of a system-driven issue? You know, working to try and address that, and using that evidence for consumer duty is really key too. In terms of advisor monitoring, that's all about training and competence. Skills assessments, regular one-to-one meetings, KPI reviews, looking at things like persistency, business spread, etc. Credit worthiness and an annual certification, which is part of the senior management and certification regime. Now, although that potentially looks a lot, that's day-to-day business as usual. It's ingrained within a business, and this is actually part of individual advisor development and improving systems for providing better services to clients. So, you know, we don't see these as an overlay on top. We see these as fundamental, built into your day-to-day, week-to-week business activities. They provide good outcomes for customers, and it's a little bit of a safety belt as well. So as a directly authorised firm, these controls should really provide peace of mind too. Okay, I'd just like to hand back to Sandy now, just to cover a couple of the more recent, what we call hot topics from the regulator. So I'll hand back to Sandy.
Thank you very much, Paul. So it's impossible to ignore consumer duty. It's been absolutely everywhere over the last probably 18 months to 2 years in terms of the press, but also publications from the regulator, the FCA. I think it's important just to have a bit of context to consumer duties sometimes. So why did we need consumer duty in the first place? Well, really it stemmed from some pretty alarming statistics that came out through this financial life survey that the FCA run with consumers each year, saying that basically there were low levels of trust and confidence in financial services as a whole, and things needed to improve. And consumer duty is the way that the regulator is looking to make those improvements. And actually, yeah, when you think about it, we have seen the ugly side of financial services in recent years. You know, when you think about, you know, inappropriate products being sold, we're not suitable. So things like high cost short-term credit to vulnerable borrowers, complex investments, things like contracts for difference sold to inexperienced investors, and things like the exploitation of loyalty and inertia in the insurance sector, to name just a few. It's important to realise, I think, that consumer duty applies to, well, not just advisors, but the whole of financial services, to strive improvement in, you know, across the board. Another thing is that consumer duty, it hasn't dropped into a vacuum. It drops in a way on top of existing rules and guidance, and it's not a highly technical. It's quite an awkward and difficult regulation to implement, to be honest, but it's not highly technical in its you know, in its application. Really, it's just, again, a bit of a back to basics. As I said earlier, do the right things by your customers and have the evidence to back it up. Don't just rely on the status quo. Think about how you can continually strive, you know, to improve the service you offer as a business and to align that service to the needs of your customers. And a big piece of that is actually probably feedback, whether that's from your clients or staff about what improvements can be made. The actual provision of advice hasn't changed much, so you still need to assess suitability in the same way, apply that principle of acting in the client's best interest. However, the focus is more, and the challenge is more around the infrastructure, so the pipe work that sits behind good advice. So collecting that management information, the benchmarking, the KPIs that back up your claims, your evidence as a business that you're giving good advice and delivering those good outcomes. So where are we in the journey? I don't much like that word, but we are at the stage where the rules have came into effect last year, and we are now due the first annual assessment of good outcomes, and that is due by the end of July. And basically that's a requirement written into the rules that says that you must at least annually review good outcomes, and the firm's board must sign off to say, yes, we're happy, we've got the evidence, we've got the data to say we're doing a good job, and or we've identified these issues and we're going to make these improvements going forward. So we have this annual assessment due, and we've actually just recently released some support for firms, so a bit of a kind of monitoring structure that gives you that data feed that then can allow you to complete your board assessment to assure the senior managers in the business, yes, we're doing what we need to be doing. So in terms of consumer duty itself, I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with the structure. We have this overarching principle we talked about earlier. We've got these cross-cutting rules, the act in good faith, avoid causing foreseeable harm, enable and support customers to achieve or pursue their objectives, and then these 4 outcomes which sit below and kind of strengthen those expectations. And we've kind of designed our support to kind of draw out on those 4 outcomes. So the products and services, price and value, customer understanding, customer support. What evidence do you have to show that you're doing a good job in that space? But we've also expanded it to cover culture and governance, making sure, as Paul says, it's part of board minutes, part of your ongoing training, it's part of your T&C plan, and also vulnerable customers, which is a huge area of focus for the regulator. So as I've said, senior managers, this is a bit of a call to action to certainly all directly authorised firms, but I expect also as ARs you'll be hearing from your network or principal about this too. But you have to carry out a review and approve an annual assessment of good outcomes by 31st July. You don't need to supply that to the FCA, in fact. However, the regulator has said they might ask for a copy. And as I say, it should show evidence of scrutiny and challenge where necessary. Gaps should be identified and actions taken to address. And of course, the slightly awkward subject of proportionality applies. So we try to design our support, certainly the board report should be more detailed, I think, depending on whether, we have some firms where it's perhaps a one-person firm. They are the business. They can see what's happening within the business because they're the one delivering the advice. The requirements for data and MI are slightly less for that firm, perhaps, than a firm where the senior managers are detached. So frontline staff are away out operating in the field, and you as senior managers are sitting above that. You as senior managers need to be able to see, right, I know my staff are doing what they need to be doing. Data and MI flow there is expected to be greater. So as I say, we've got this annual assessment that we've created. It's focusing on these 6 areas and feeds into a governing body report due by the end of July. And here are some of the key data feeds. So this is taken from the FCA's finalised guidance. In fact, a lot of them I think will be pretty familiar to those on the call today. KPIs, file review outcomes, is the firm achieved its T&C plan? Paul's already mentioned the importance of delivering an ongoing service, not just on time, but in line with what you've promised. Complaints, feedback, as we've mentioned, compliance reports. If you have a compliance consultant coming in recommending improvements, have you acted upon those recommendations? And of course, the outcomes for any vulnerable customers that you encounter. So those are the key data feeds to your annual monitoring. And as I mentioned just a few times there, vulnerable customers. So we know there's a review again underway this year. It's possible that a survey might drop into your inbox asking you about the number of situations you've encountered, what adaptations you've made, what training you've undertaken, and have you thought about particular vulnerabilities that exist within your target market. I know there are tools out there as well, some great tools. I think Paul's going to talk about one later that can assist you with that too. So, and then hot off the press, we've got the thematic review of retirement income advice, something we've been waiting for a while, in fact. So basically the FCA, they published this report. It's 53 pages long. It is a detailed but a good read. Recommend everyone on the call that has some responsibility or for this reads that carefully and shares important information within the business. Importantly, and I think rightly, the FCA has recognised that advisors have a crucial role to play to help consumers in this sector. We have a growing advice gap. The market for DC, decumulation market is it's huge, in fact, not just significant. I think the figure quoted 1.41 trillion, the size of the defined contribution market in 2022, and obviously we've got auto enrolment, increasing the number of individuals accumulating these types of savings. And we know we've got changes in the annuity markets going on through market conditions too. And it's right, I think, that the FCA is focusing on quality, making sure that firms that the market's functioning well, the recommendations that firms are giving meet the needs and objectives, the right clients are going into investment risk withdrawdown or securing a guaranteed income or a blend of the two where appropriate. So without going into great detail, the FCA has helpfully identified 5 key areas for improvement. One is around income withdrawal strategy methodology. So we published an article, actually, if you're using a cash flow modeler as a business, you must go away and read that cash flow modeling article, just saying, look, these are the types of steps you need to be taking. Cash flow modeling is extremely powerful tool in terms of supporting a client's understanding, justifying recommendations, and also assessing capacity for loss, but only if it's used correctly. So saying, look, you need to make sure the tool is working and is used correctly. You've done your due diligence. You've got that consistency in methodology. Same with risk profiling. The FCA said really that for a client that's leaving accumulation, entering into decumulation, that should be reassessed. And also that there shouldn't just be a focus on accumulation, there should be some focus on decumulation too. And we've designed, I think it was an attitude to income drawdown risk questionnaire, to sit alongside to strengthen a file in this space. Advice suitability, so important to get files checked, to identify failings. FCA, it's quite a small cohort of firms that got files checked. However, there were some mixed findings, a lot of suitable advice, but some issues identified. For example, lack of necessary information, loss of guaranteed and features penalties incurred, for example, unnecessary tax paid. And then finally, as we talked about, periodic reviews. So that's your ongoing service, making sure that's up to date. So important for clients in drawdown that's been monitored and changes have been made as required. And then effective oversight. So making sure your statement of responsibility is clear, who is responsible within the business for this area of advice, making sure your data and MI, your advice registers are correct, and also if you carry out in-house advice checking, there should be some check the checker process in place too. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the thematic review. Expect we'll hear loads more about that in the coming months, as firms digest the content. Paul, back to you.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks very much for that. Some really interesting food for thought there with regards to those two regulatory initiatives. Just before I move on to just have a quick, just highlight some support that is available for firms to help them with this. It's just look at a couple more polls that we're just going to run. One is in relation to consumer duty. So at the end of July, there is an assessment, internal assessments that need to be done to show where people are, how firms are performing in terms of being able to evidence those good outcomes for consumer duty. So we're looking to say, okay, well, in terms of confidence in doing that, who is very confident that they're going to have their assessment ready, who's sort of on the fence 50-50, and who's not confident at all that assessment will be ready in time. And finally, one last poll there. That's interesting. So in terms of poll results there, 70% on the call are very confident that they'll have that assessment ready. That's really heartening. That's really good. Good to see. I think that puts us in a really good position as an industry. And one final poll, so I shall publish now. So having read the FCA's retirement income report, how comfortable are you that you are delivering the expected outcomes as highlighted by the regulator there? So are you confident, not sure, not confident, or have you not read that that document yet that's been issued by the regulator? It is 50 pages long, but it has got some really good practice points in it. So I'll just leave that one open for a few more seconds. Obviously, if you don't carry out that sort of business, if you don't do that retirement income business, you're not going to have read it probably. Okay, so a bit of a spread there from 53% confident of delivering those outcomes, and then a spread between not sure and not confident, and 20% not read, which I would assume is based on the business types that people write. Okay, right. Thanks very much for your time there with those polls. It does provide some interesting information for us to gather, and just it sort of shapes the support that we can provide as a business. It's probably just worth just reflecting on what we've been through this afternoon over this lunchtime. There's been a lot of slides there, and there's been quite a lot of information presented, but there's nothing in there that is overly complex. There's nothing in there that is overly onerous to actually produce. And we see a lot of that work that's done it's good business practice. Having MI is good business practice. Having good monitoring, consistent monitoring, having advisors undertaking CPD, having solid governance framework, risk management, that's all good business practice. And the importance is to apply it, as Sandy said, on a proportionate basis. So whether you're a sole trader or a multi-director firm, there will be different applications of those themes within there. So anyone who has engaged as a compliance consultant or wants to engage a compliance consultant to help them will get a proportionate answer there, and the solution should always be based and shaped to your business rather than just a blanket approach applied to everyone. So what support is available? So from SimplyBiz and Compliance First, we do have a lot of compliance support available. So there's a regulatory team and compliance consultants that are based around the country, and an advice quality team that undertakes file reviews as well. So things like consumer duty assessment preparation, retirement advice review support is things that we can support firms with. Annual audits, health checks, checking in on the business, making sure that everything that should be being done is being done. That's your peace of mind, that's your safety belt really. Looking at compliance monitoring plans as well, setting them up with firms and making sure and work with firms to make sure that they're actually happening, as well as client file reviews to make sure that there are suitable outcomes and clients are getting suitable advice from the wider business. We have a business consultancy team that looks at things like value assessments, consumer duty, and as well as centralised investment propositions, centralised retirement propositions as well, which is something the FCA flagged in their last paper. Two totally different audiences, two totally different types of clients, and should probably have two different advice processes applicable to them. And then we have a training, competence and certification scheme and support in that areas as well. So that's advisor monitoring, that's file review support too. So that's really helping in supporting smaller firms who might not have internal supervisors to be able to actually carry that out efficiently and effectively. Recruitment support, certification, one-to-one, skills assessments, any businesses that are looking to grow, really hone in on that support as well for help there. And finally, the wider Fintel group. So Fintel is SimplyBiz is part of the Fintel group. The two key brands there were SimplyBiz, Compliance First and De Facto. And there are a number of different companies that are part of this group now. And key things that can support what we just looked at there. Vouched for is a real effective feedback gathering tool. So that's part of the family. And Competence Advisor is all about knowledge for advisors, CPD, testing, making sure that people are competent. And then there's research tools as well. And De Facto has the Engage system, which SimplyBiz members are given complimentary for joining. That Engage system has got a lot of solutions for the retirement income advice review as well. So that actually includes things like it includes risk profiling, and it includes a cash flow modelling tool as well, included as basic within the membership. So lots of solutions there to support directly authorised firms as BAU within the SimplyBiz and Fintel family. So in terms of where we are, the learning outcomes that we were looking to deliver today, hopefully you've got a flavour there. If you're looking to go directly authorised, it's something you've been considering and thinking about. Hopefully that will just act to show you that, the things that you need to do that your network is doing at the moment, it's not too onerous and it is good business practice. There's nothing significant in there that you wouldn't want to be doing anyway, just key. And if you are already directly authorised, hopefully some of the work that that Sandy's shown on there with the consumer duty, the retirement income review, and some of the best practice things that we put up with regards to governance, risk monitoring and general advice monitoring as well. Hopefully you'll take something from there and be able to use that to improve your business as well. So from myself and Sandy, thank you very much for your time there. And if I just hand back to Hope, whether we've got any questions.
Thanks so much, Paul and Sandy. We've actually had quite a lot of questions that have come in, but unfortunately we are reaching the end of our time together. A lot of them are technical questions, but there's one that stood out to me that I'd like you both to perhaps just answer quickly in the last minute or so that we have, which is slightly different. And that is, do you think the regulator has an ulterior agenda or a different motive to remove some of these small directly authorised firms and push them in towards becoming directly authorised?
Sandy?
I'm probably happy to take that, although I might have to be careful what I say, to be honest. But I think the reality is that they have an awful lot of firms to regulate the FCA. I think it's something like 45,000 firms that they are responsible for, and I'd expect there are pressures at their end too. And there is no question that we have seen challenges for smaller firms through increased reporting is a great example. It does feel like we're going through a spell where firms need to stick the hard hat on and, you know, just weather the storm, particularly in that reporting space, you know, with the hope that actually things will begin to ease off again. But like I say, with its shift to being a data-led regulator and this increase in reporting, it is increasingly, you know, hard for smaller firms to keep on top of things. But that's where we come in. You know, your compliance consultants who've got huge experience, you know, from dealing with all these firms and trying to make it as easy, you know, as possible for, you know, through technology, as Paul's just been talking about.
And I think, you know, the regulator has been really clear in the consumer duty papers that proportionality is key there. So an ulterior motive to reduce, don't think there's a specific agenda to reduce. The population within the UK, there was, you know, there was a survey, Financial Lives survey, that was carried out over the last couple of years. That really highlights the fact that there is an absolute need for financial advice. Now, some places will, you know, the high street does not have banks and building societies like it used to. So there's definitely a place for the small advisor. There's definitely a place for the local advisor to service clients. And in terms of what they need to do, I think there's a review ongoing at the moment to sort of address that advice scope from the regulator. So it's definitely a need. I don't think there is a deliberate direction to reduce firms there, but I think firms may need to just engage a little bit of support to carry out some of the work that they need to do. And as Sandy said, technology and efficiency moving forward is really the way.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your views. To everybody that their question didn't get a chance to be asked, don't worry.
We'll answer them.
Get those questions
we'll do it.
Sandy and Paul, so they will be able to answer those after the event. Just before we wrap up, a reminder that your CPD will be delivered tomorrow, and you will also get a copy of the slides. Now, just before we head off, a quick teaser of what's to come from PA events over the next few weeks. If you are watching this session and you are anywhere near Wilmslow, Macclesfield, Ely or Bristol next week, you should expect an invitation to one of 3 regional working lunches with our friends at Goldman Sachs Asset Management and Legal in General. These events offer a great 3-course lunch while listening to 2 presentations in a convivial setting near you. So we're going to be at Mottram Hall on the 16th of April, and on the 17th we'll be in Cambridgeshire at the Old Hall in Ely, and we'll round off this series on the 18th at the Bristol Golf Club. So do keep an eye out for an invitation if you live anywhere near any of those venues. Now, on the 25th of April, we'll be hosting our annual PA 360 conference at a new venue in London this year. It's now the largest conference for advisors in the UK. We're growing, so we've moved to 133 Houndsditch in the city, and it should be a really great day. We look forward to seeing you there. And then finally, on the 15th and 16th of May, we're going to be running the 2nd edition of our very successful Professional Advisor Management Retreat in Dorking. This is a 2-day conference exclusively aimed at those who are either senior directors of advice firms or owners of advice firms. And so if you want to secure your spot, places are limited. So I would encourage you to register now to avoid missing out. But all in all, that is 17 hours of CPD over the next few weeks. And as ever, if you wish to find information on any of our events or sign up, you can do that at professionaladvisor.com/events. So that is it for today's session. Thank you again so much to SimplyBiz, to Sandy and to Paul, and thank you very much to you for your company this lunchtime, and we will see you on the next session. Thank you.